Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the On Centerline podcast. I am your host, Sam Terrell, the Northwest Aeronaut on YouTube. Thank you very much for joining me. Hey, before we get started today, could I ask you a favor? Could you please like and subscribe if you're here on YouTube, and follow the show if you're listening out there in podcast land. I really would appreciate that. It's going to help get the word out about the show and help us continue to grow. You guys have been so great with all of your support thus far, and hopefully you are enjoying the show. And if you are getting something out of it, we'd really appreciate that subscribe or that follow. So I know it's been a while since we got the podcast out, a couple weeks at least. There's been a lot of stuff happening. I did a cross-country flight, and when I say that, I don't just mean like a training cross-country. I mean an actual cross-country flight. We flew from Boston, Massachusetts, all the way back to Oregon here in Hillsboro. One of my students, Jason, bought a beautiful 76 Cardinal, and so we went and did his instrument training on the way back, and I helped him ferry it back home. Lots of challenges involved with that flight in the middle of winter, basically in the middle of February, so it took a lot of planning, a lot of coordination, but it was a great learning experience. So I am making a video about that trip, and it will come out eventually. As you can imagine, 30 plus hours of footage and flying makes for a lot of editing and trying to move things along because it's not that interesting all the time. So we had that trip. I just got back from a vacation last week. I was gone with my wonderful wife, and we went on a nice cruise to Central America, and it was a great time. So it's been really busy. I've been out of town a lot. And now we're getting into flight training season, and so that means I'm going to be super busy. I'm going to do my best to stay as consistent as possible with new content, but it may slow down a little bit or get a little less consistent, but I'm going to do the best I can as we get into the season here. Hey, one last thing before we dive into our topic today. Listen, I always appreciate hearing from all of you and love being able to respond to you whenever I'm able. I wanted to respond to one recent note I got through the podcast's fan mail here. A reminder quickly that if you send a fan mail message with the link below that says send us a text, I definitely will get the message, but unfortunately I'm not able to respond to those messages. So if you are wanting a response, it's best to either shoot me a message on my website, northwestaeronaut.com, or leave a comment on YouTube or Spotify where I can reply to you directly. But this message comes from a listener out of Cincinnati, Ohio, and it reads, "It would be great if you could do a breakdown of the aircraft dispatcher test standards to pass the oral, flight plan, and even the ADX written exams." So, first of all, I'm so happy to hear from so many of you that my previous breakdowns have been so helpful in passing check rides, and the fact that you're wanting more for other topics is so great to hear. In response to this particular request, unfortunately, I'm not an aircraft dispatcher. I have no experience with that written exam or practical test, so sadly, I'm not really in a position to be able to break that down at any meaningful or authoritative level. However, looking into the details of the ADX exam, the dispatcher exam, I see it is largely reflected or largely reflects the topics of the ATP multi-engine exam, which I have taken and am familiar with. So if it is of interest to all of you out there, you can let me know in the comments, because what I can do is go through some of the practice test questions from the ADX exam and break those down, which again kind of mirror the ATP written questions as well. But let me know if that's something you guys would be interested in, and I definitely appreciate receiving those comments and those questions through fan mail and other means. All right, guys. Well, let's get started with today's topic. Today we are talking about 5 things, 5 tips, if you will, for instrument students. Okay, 5 tips For you instrument students out there, that are just little things that come up with my own students, and I don't really hear them talked about much in general. So we're going to start with these 5 tips for instrument flying. Number 1, don't use the touch screens for frequency changes. So often these days we have our GTN, 650s, 750s, and other touch screens that incorporate our radios into them. And so they give you the option of touching the touch screen and just typing in the radio frequency. Now, at first glance, this may seem convenient because you don't have to scroll through a bunch of other numbers to get to the frequency you want. However, what you're probably going to quickly find is that as you're flying along, especially if you're in the soup, if you're in IMC conditions and you're being thrown around with turbulence, bumped around all over the place, and there's a lot you're having to focus on, and you need to go and put a frequency in among all the other things you have to do. Every time you're trying to look over to that radio and trying to see the number you have to push, and then coordinate your hand and steady your hand to push the button, and you're pushing the wrong button, and then you got to delete that number and then hit the right button, and it's just going to be a big hassle. It's going to take your attention away from flying the airplane and doing all the other things you need to do. So I always tell my students, don't use the touchscreen to change frequencies. Use the knob, just like we did in the old days, okay? The knob gives you something physical that you can grab onto, that you can use to steady your hand, and you don't have to be looking at the radio while you're changing the frequency. You can continue to scan your instruments, fly the plane, turn one twist of the knob, take a quick glance to see how close you are to where you need to be, and then continue turning and do it in a very precise manner. All while, again, having something to hold on to so your hand's not bumping around or anything like that. Makes it a lot safer, a lot more efficient to get those frequencies in there because you're not making mistakes and taking your attention away. So get out of the habit, if you're in it, of using the touchscreen to put in frequencies. I don't even care if you're on the ground. Just use the knob to change frequencies and be in the habit of doing that. It's going to go a long way to making your life easier and ultimately safer. All right, number 2. In our glass cockpits these days, we have a lot of nifty tools, and probably the most consequential, or one of the most consequential of which in the recent decades, is our wind correction diamond. This is a magenta diamond that you're probably used to seeing either on your Garmin G5 or on your G1000 or any other kind of glass display that shows essentially your track over the ground and is compensated for wind. So it's often different from your heading because, of course, depending on what the wind's doing, you're not going to be traveling in the direction that you are heading. You're going to be blowing either slightly left or slightly right. And being able to know exactly where you're traveling through use of that magenta diamond makes a huge difference in being able to track a course or fly an approach. Now, as people are learning to use this magenta diamond, sometimes they get a little confused, they get a little turned around, and they don't know, if the diamond's on the left, they start turning left. They start kind of chasing the diamond, and they find quickly that that's the wrong way to turn. So, the way I always explain it to my students is, you are the diamond, okay? You are the diamond. Some people say you need to pull the diamond. You need to pull it in the direction you want it to go. Whatever way works best for you is fine. But I say, my students, you are the diamond. So if that diamond is left of course, you need to turn right to bring the diamond over to the right to get back on course, okay? So that's one of the tips that I use to kind of help you get used to how that diamond moves and how you need to manipulate it. Just remember, you are the diamond. You move it. You move yourself in the direction that the diamond needs to move in order to track a course or to intercept a course. All right, number 3, guys. Don't bank more than half the amount of degrees that the turn you need to make is. That was really badly stated. Let me rephrase that. One of the hardest things in instrument flying is to learn how to not overcorrect and not over control. We want to avoid chasing needles and things like that. And so in order to do that, we want to limit our bank angles to be no more than half the number of degrees we need to turn. So if you get an instruction from ATC that says 65813, turn right 270, and you're at 250, well, that's a turn of 20 degrees. Okay, we're going to be turning right to 270, 20 degrees. So that means our bank angle should not exceed half that. Half of 20, of course, is 10, which means our bank angle should be no more than 10 degrees. All right? If you follow this rule of thumb, it will go a long way in preventing you from over-controlling the airplane and over-correcting or overturning, shooting through courses, things like that. If you only need to make a 10-degree turn, if they say 65813, turn left 10 degrees, you're not banking more than 5 degrees. And this is only up to the point at which you meet the standard rate turn bank angle, okay? So usually that's going to be around 30 degrees. If you need to make a turn of 30 degrees, it's going to be, no more than 15 degrees of bank. And that's right around where you're usually going to be in your standard rate turn. So anything beyond 30 degrees, it's going to be the same. 15, 18 degrees tops of bank angle. It's going to prevent you from overbanking and overcorrecting. All right? So don't bank more than half the number of degrees you need to actually turn. All right, guys. Number 4, fly without the attitude indicator. This is something I do almost from day one with my instrument students. I am typically turning off or covering up that attitude indicator, and I encourage you guys to do this as much as possible. The new technology we have these days with PFDs and the G5s are, again, great tools, but they also, especially in the case of a G5, when put in place of the attitude indicator, is intended to be used as a primary instrument strictly for that one thing, for the attitude indicator. And unfortunately, what happens is it makes everything so easy to see because not only, of course, does it have your attitude indicator, it has your altitude and your airspeed and turn coordinate, pretty much has everything you need right there. And as a result, people fail to develop their proper instrument scan. So in order to facilitate getting your eyeballs moving across all 6 instruments, turn off that attitude indicator, especially if it is a G5 type device. But even if you're just in a normal 6-pack, cover up the attitude indicator. It's going to help facilitate your scan and really going to help with your cross-check, okay? So my goal for my students is always, kind of a 2-part goal. I ideally would like it to be even harder for them to fly with the attitude indicator than without, because they're just so used to doing it without. And 2, get them to the point where if they did lose their attitude indicator, they don't even care. They don't even notice it's gone because they're so used to looking at the other instruments, utilizing that cross-check, that it's just a minor inconvenience at best, okay? Now, of course, we don't want to understate the importance and the utility of the attitude indicator, especially when it comes to the control performance method. But to develop that scan and get used to that cross-check, flying without that attitude indicator as much as possible is going to go a long way to making you a safe and proficient instrument pilot. All right, guys. Number 5, know your performance profiles. All right. As you've seen in many of my videos, I'm all about making the airplane do the work. Okay. That involves trimming and kind of knowing the recipes that are going to get you certain results. So performance profiles are certain pitch and power combinations that give you a desired result. We use these in all sorts of phases of flight, climbs, just level, straight and level flight for various airspeeds, and of course, when we're flying the approach. So an example of a performance profile might be like in our Cessna 172, we would be in a certain configuration, which would be the approach configuration, maybe 10 degrees of flaps. We'll be at 90 knots. We'll have our power set to 1900 RPM, and our nose will be about 4 degrees below the horizon on the attitude indicator. So knowing this performance profile, we know that that's going to set us up primarily to follow a glide slope all the way down to the runway. And we know that 1900 RPM and that 4 degrees nose down with 10 degrees of flaps will give us our approach speed of 90 knots. So assuming we are in level flight on our localizer, trimmed for level flight at 90 knots, perhaps without our flaps in yet, that might require 21 to 2200 RPM. And as we intercept that glide slope, we're going to do things, in our case, maybe turn on carb heat. But as soon as we intercept that glide slope, we're going to pull the power back to 1900 RPM. We're going to put in that 10 degrees of flaps. We're going to put the nose trim down one full turn and let the nose come down to that 4 degrees below the horizon. Just knowing that recipe, knowing that performance profile will allow us to seamlessly intercept that glide slope and follow it all the way down, more or less hands off, assuming it's a nice calm day and there's not a lot of turbulence busting you around, okay? So performance profiles are things that your instructor can certainly help you with. And if you're not sure what they are already, you can go out and figure them out. Go out, figure out what RPM setting it takes, what trim setting or flap setting it takes to maybe fly straight and level at 90 knots or whatever speed you are looking for. Then look at what it takes to establish a 500 foot per minute descent at 90 knots, both in power and the trim change from that level flight to the descent. Okay. You can, of course, figure out these profiles for climbs. You can figure them out for a regular cruise and perhaps a slow cruise. All right. But knowing these performance profiles with pitch and power settings, it's not only going to make your life a lot easier as an instrument pilot, it's also going to make it a lot safer. For instance, if you were to ever have a pitot-static failure, you lose your airspeed information, you can use these pitch and power profiles to know how to get a certain performance, a certain result. You know you want to be at 90 knots, so you know that 2100 RPM and this pitch attitude will get you at 90 knots. So even if you don't have a airspeed indication, you know you will be right around 90 knots with that profile. All right, guys. So there you have it. 5 tips for you instrument pilots. If this has been helpful for you, please share it with anyone else that you think would find it helpful. I really appreciate you spending time with me today, and we will see you next time on Centerline.